everyone! In today's video I will share my way how to make sourdough bread using whole grain einkorn flour. First I'm gonna be preparing levain. Night before mixing day I fed my sourdough starter, my einkorn sourdough starter, and by the morning it was ready to use. I keep my sourdough starter at 60% hydration. For the levain, I wanted to make it even less hydration, 50%. So for 20 grams of sourdough starter, I took 20 grams of whole grain einkorn flour and 10 grams of warm filtered water. First, I mixed my starter with water a little bit just to break it in smaller pieces, and then I added my flour. I used the same amount of starter and flour, so my levain would be ready in about 4 hours. And then I mixed my levain into a stiff dough ball. To mix my levain I used silicone spatula. Then I helped myself a little bit with the dough scraper just to scrape the dough from the side of the bowl, and then finished it up with the spatula again, making sure it's all mixed well and there's no dry flour left. This is how my levain looked after mixing. I covered it with a plastic hat and left in my proofer at 75 Fahrenheit for 4 hours. And while my levain was getting ready in the proofer, I prepared my flour. For one loaf, I took 500 grams of whole grain einkorn flour. I usually mill my own. And then I weighed my water. For one loaf I needed 325 grams of filtered water. I usually warm up my water a little bit, so it at least 75-78 Fahrenheit. And then I took 10 grams of salt. For my bread I usually use pink salt. You can use any sea salt as long as it has no additives. And here's all we need for one loaf of bread: 500 grams of whole grain einkorn flour, 10 grams of salt, 325 grams of warm water, and 50 grams of ripe sourdough einkorn levain. In 4 hours it doubled in size, looked all puffy and ready to be used for our bread. I sprinkled my salt on top of the flour and mixed it together, making sure all salt spread evenly through the whole flour. I kind of fluffed the flour up a little bit, giving it some oxygen. And here I'm showing how our sourdough levain starter looks inside. I poured some of my prepared water into the bowl with the levain and mixed it with the spatula a little bit, scraping from the sides of the bowl. And added this mixture to my flour. And then I added the rest of the water to my flour also. I started mixing my dough with the spatula. This dough is kind of sticky at the beginning, so I try to mix with the spatula as long as I can. At first it may seem that the dough is really dry, there's not enough water in it, but einkorn flour absorbs water slower than regular wheat flour, so don't rush adding more water. Just let it sit a little bit and you'll see how it looks. After I combine flour and water together with the spatula, I continue mixing the dough with my hand. I dip my hand into water so the dough doesn't stick to my hand so much. But the dough with whole grain einkorn flour is not as sticky as the dough with all-purpose einkorn flour. And you can see how it's all breaking in pieces. So yeah, I combined it all together. scraped sides of the bowl with the dough scraper, covered my bowl with the plastic hat, and left on my countertop for 30 minutes. It was about 72 Fahrenheit in my kitchen. And this is how dough looks after 30 minutes. I checked and dough torn into pieces and not elastic at all yet. And I'm going to be doing my first set of stretches and folds. I pulled the dough from one side, stretched a little bit and folded. Then I did the same thing from the other side and from the other side. And then I realized that the dough was kind of stiff, so it was kind of hard to stretch it in a bowl. So I picked the dough up, and it was much easier to stretch this dough in my hands. So I did the stretches and folds again, formed the dough into a bowl, placed it back, covered with the plastic hat, and left on my countertop for another 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, I was ready for my second set of stretches and folds. This time, I decided to do it right away in my hand. I picked up the dough from the bowl, and you can see how the dough is more elastic now, stretches much better. So I did all my folds from all four sides, formed the dough into a ball, and placed it back, covered with the plastic hat, and left for another 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, I was ready for my third set of stretches and folds. I checked the dough. It looked more stretchy, more elastic, and I did my third set of stretches and folds from all four sides. Then I kind of rolled it up, placed it back into a bowl, and left on my countertop for another 30 minutes. And then I did my fourth set of stretches and folds, picked up my dough. It was kind of sticky, so make sure you wet your hands. And I did my stretches and folds just like I did before. And you can see the difference. It's like more elastic, more stretchy, and more pleasant to handle. Placed it back, covered, and left on the countertop for another 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, I did my fifth last set of stretches and folds. I wet my hands, picked up the dough, and gently, this time I didn't stretch my dough so much, gently folded, placed back into a bowl, covered, and left on my countertop for an hour and a half. And this is my dough after an hour and a half. Total time after mixing was 4 hours. I sprinkled flour on my countertop, took the dough out of the bowl, flattened it a little, and pre-shaped into a tight ball. You want to make sure the top of the dough is like all smooth and the bottom is sealed. And this is how I do it. Then I transfer my dough onto a floured surface and leave on my countertop at room temperature for 20-25 minutes. If you want, you can cover your dough with a kitchen towel or the mixing bowl you were using, just to keep it warmer and prevent the top of the dough from drying too much. I'm going to shape this loaf into butter. I prepared this basket and I'm going to line it with the cotton cloth. I like doing it so I don't need to wash my baskets all the time, keep them clean and dry, and also I don't need to use any flour. I dust countertop with the flour and then flip the dough smooth side down and flatten it into a flat circle. And shape it into a buttered. This is how my loaf looks at this point. I transfer it into a basket, smooth side down. I cover my loaf with the cloth, then I put plastic hat over the basket and leave at room temperature for 20 minutes. And this is how my loaf looks after 20 minutes at room temperature. I'm gonna cover it back and send to the fridge for cold proofing for 12 to 14 hours overnight. Next morning, after letting my dough proof in fridge for 14 hours, 12 to 14 hours usually enough for the einkorn bread. So I'm ready to bake mine. I'm actually going to be baking 2 of my breads. They're going to be in different videos, but I'm just going to bake them at once because my pizza stone is big enough for both of them, so why not? And yeah, I already placed my pizza stone into my regular kitchen oven. I usually place it on the second shelf from the bottom. And I started to preheat my oven to 450 Fahrenheit. And usually with the stone, I preheat it at least for 40 minutes. And by the time my bread is ready to go to the oven, I will make sure I have boiling water to create the steam. For the steam, I use my very old baking pan and some kitchen towels. I just kind of like fold them, roll them up, place them into my pan like that, and I will make sure I have enough of boiling water to cover those towels completely. This will create a very nice steam for my oven. So right now my oven is preheating. When it's ready, I will score my bread and we'll start baking. My oven preheated and I'm ready to score my bread and bake. This is how it looks after being in fridge for 14 hours. Doesn't show much difference. And I'm gonna transfer it onto prepared parchment paper. And I like to sprinkle some of rice flour on top of my loaf so my design looks better. First, I usually like to do some kind of design and then I do my main scoring. And send my bread into preheated oven. So the bread is in. I will bake with the steam for 20 minutes at 450 Fahrenheit. Then I will remove my baking pan with the towels out and lower temperature to 400 Fahrenheit. And we'll bake another 35 minutes. And then we'll see the result. I just love how this whole grain einkorn loaf turned out. Look at this beautiful bread. Yeah, it didn't rise as high as white einkorn bread, but for the whole grain, especially einkorn whole grain, it looks really, really good. I just need to wait a couple hours till it cools down so I can slice. And we can see the crumb. And I will leave a link to the video with the recipe of my white einkorn bread down in the description box. Thanks for watching my video. If you like it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, as I have many more recipes with Einkorn to share. You have a wonderful day. Bye.